Hello, everybody. How is everyone doing today? I hope you're in good health, that you're having a nice time with friends, with family. And I see a lot of people here, so thank you guys for the attendance. Now, give me 1 second while I'm getting the information I need on the screen, and we can start. Just so everyone is aware, mics are disabled, but you can always use the chat for your questions, all right? The idea is to go over some introductory items today, review your questions, of course, and we are going to do an overview about Copilot. So just let me get missing information and I'm done. Well, I'm going to share my screen. Give me 1 second, please. All right, and please let me know if you guys can see my screen on the chat. Just a comment, anything, and I can start, all right? Perfect. All right, so first of all, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Sebastián Rodriguez. I work for the Microsoft 365 product group, and I have been personally dealing with Copilot, the Viva Suite, and other products over the last 6 to 8 months, approximately. Now, in this session, we are going to be covering Microsoft 365 Copilot from the end user perspective, all right? Meaning that today we are not going to get into deep technical discussions. We are not going to find information that's only known by developers and things like that. But the idea is to get a general approach and understanding of Copilot, how the licensing for Copilot works, what is Microsoft Graph in the context of Copilot, and also intelligent search, or what is known as semantic index. All right? Great. So as I said, if anyone has questions, feel free to use the chat for that. And what we are seeing here on the screen is a test tenant where I have my user account and I have a tenant with Copilot NA, all right? Before we go deep into the product, it's important that we understand what is Copilot, what are the different licensing scenarios, and what are the differences between these licenses in order for us to understand, okay? So first of all, we have many products that are called Copilot nowadays. We have Copilot, which used to be Bing Chat Enterprise. We have Sales Copilot or Copilot for Viva, which used to be Copilot for Dynamics 365. We have Copilot for Power Platform, for Microsoft 365, and also for extensibility via Graph. So Copilot is not only one product, it's a collection of services around generative AI that are implemented by multiple groups inside Microsoft, meaning that the team that's implementing Teams is not the same team that's implementing Copilot for Word, for Excel, for PowerPoint, and so. So the first thing I'm going to do here is start with sharing some information that is public information, okay? I don't like to produce PowerPoints or things like that because I think that the information that's publicly available for anyone is more than enough to start understanding the program. So for this, the first thing we need to understand is, as I was saying, what is Microsoft Copilot for Microsoft 365? Among the multiple products that Microsoft has for Copilot, you will have just Copilot which is the what you would call the free version, and you have Copilot for Microsoft 365. Meaning that if I go, for example, to bing.com, right, and I go to the chat section, let me sign in. Okay. And okay, unfortunately, this is logged in this test tenant. But here you see that I'm in Bing chat. And right now I'm using what you would call the free license or the free version of Copilot. How can you tell? It's pretty easy because you will see the name Copilot. And here you see that it says with Bing. This means that I'm using what used to be Bing Chat Enterprise, which is generative AI, pretty much like ChatGPT, but this will not be connected to my data. If you see the options, sure, I can have suggestion for creating content, organizing a table, getting features of products, things like that. But if I went to office.com and I open the Copilot application, while the name is Copilot, you will see that here I'm using Microsoft 365 with Copilot, and the options are different. Because here I'm, for example, able to view the latest information from a specific person, getting the key points from a document that's stored in my tenant, either in OneDrive or SharePoint, create an FAQ based on a file, proposing an introduction for a document, listing ideas, or something I do. In this case, it's not going to work because I'm on a test tenant, but things I do, for example, is like list the most important emails from the last 24 hours. As I said, in my case, I won't have many results because, as you can see, this is a very very empty and desolated test account. So there is not much for Microsoft to find information. You see, yeah, I wasn't able to find emails from the last 24 hours because this account has no email. So the main difference is that when you're using the paid version of Copilot, Copilot for Microsoft 365, sorry, you will be able to interact with the data from the organization. Now, if anyone has questions, please drop them in the chat because I know this is a confusing point, especially when you're starting with the technology. Nonetheless, in the meantime, I'm going to show other ways of making that distinction or difference. And the best way of doing that is going to the admin panel, all right? So here, let me find my user. I'm in the admin panel, users, active users. So once I find myself, if I go to the licenses and apps blade, you will see that not only I have a Microsoft 365 E5 license, I also have Microsoft Copilot for Microsoft 365. And it's very important to understand this because let me open here in applications. If I select only the applications that come with my E5 license, and this doesn't have to be Microsoft 365 E5, this can be Office 365 E3 or E5. It could be business standard, business premium subscription, etc. So within this license, you will see that I have a license called Copilot. Where is it? Okay, now it changed the name because until yesterday it was showing as Copilot. And this is one of the reasons we are doing these sessions because the product changes so much that if you just do a PowerPoint or a quick manual, that's going to be outdated very fast. So how do you use this free license, all right? When you are using Bing Chat Enterprise or just Copilot, and you're using a business account, right, an organization account, you have the option of having commercial data protection, meaning that whatever you are writing is not going to be stored by Microsoft. All the prompts that you are sending to the LLM are not going to be stored by Microsoft, are not going to be used by Microsoft, and Microsoft is not going to use or store the replies it gives back to you. So there's no way for Microsoft or for me as a tenant admin to track what the users are doing inside Copilot. If I have an organization and my organization policy is no AI for the people in the organization, whatever the reason is you have for that, then you would disable the commercial data protection, and that would stop people from using the Bing Chat Enterprise or Copilot with Bing option. On the other hand, if I come back to the user panel and I select the applications that come with the Microsoft Copilot for Microsoft 365 license, here I'm talking about the paid license. This is the license that's $30 a month, all right? On top of my existing Microsoft or Office 365 license and whatever extras I might have. And when I have the license selected here, you can see that I have 6 alternatives, which are the experiences of the endpoints that I want to enable or disable for my user. Because as I was saying earlier, Copilot is implemented in many ways. One of them is graph connectors in Microsoft 365 Copilot, which is something we are going to be explaining later. Intelligent search or semantic index, Microsoft 365 chat, which is the feature we were using here. We have Microsoft 365 Copilot in Microsoft Teams, meaning all Copilot features inside Teams. Microsoft 365 Copilot in productivity apps, meaning Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, OneNote, etc. And finally, Power Platform connectors in Microsoft 365 Copilot, meaning that I can purchase Copilot for my organization, I can implement Copilot in my organization, but I'm not forced to implement everything at once. Maybe I just want to implement Microsoft 365's chat and intelligent search. Or maybe I only want to use the graph connectors. Or maybe I just want to use Copilot inside the productivity apps and not with business chat. That's the flexibility you have by assigning each experience after you assign the license to the user. If anyone has questions, again, feel free to drop them on the chat. All right, guys? Perfect. Okay, so continuing with the information here. When we have a Microsoft 365 Copilot license, we have access to, as I was saying, multiple experiences, all right? So first of all, you have integration with Graph, which is the API that Microsoft 365 uses for interacting with all the services. And this is going to be explained in detail once we reach the graph that's below. But also, you have the option of using Copilot in any of these applications for any of these features. And it's very important to understand that while Copilot is generative AI, not everything is implemented, meaning I cannot say or tell to Copilot, hey, tell me, I don't know, all the things that Harold has on his agenda for today, because that is out of scope. That is not supported yet. You could build it with your own plugin via Graph and all those other options, but native out of the box, that is not available. So here, which is already shared on the chat with you guys, you can see what functions are available for each application. And don't worry, because we are going to review this in the following sessions when we are dedicated either to Teams or the productivity apps, okay? For example, in Word, you have the options of creating a draft with Copilot or using chat, meaning that you can interact with Copilot inside Word to ask it to rewrite a paragraph, to generate some content, to float some ideas, etc. In the case of PowerPoint, you have draft and chat as well. The chat is mostly for summaries and Q&As, like asking about content specifically located in that slide, things like that. Or being able to create a new presentation based on a Word document using enterprise templates. This is a very interesting topic, especially if you're a large organization where branding is key. So please come to that Microsoft 365 apps session because we are going to be reviewing each experience one by one. You also have light commanding, right? So here you can add light commands like, I don't know, create a new slide, add a title, rewrite the text, things like that. And for other applications, we have, for example, in the case of Loop, mostly editing or refining the edition via Copilot. In Outlook, we have the options of drafting, summarizing content, and also getting coaching tips regarding the things that we are writing. And as you can see, Teams is the most extensive one because you have Copilot for chat, for meetings, for calls. You have business chat or Microsoft 365 chat within the Teams client. And you also have Copilot in Whiteboard. Finally, you also have Copilot in OneNote for drafting content, reorganizing content, getting summaries, etc. But again, this is just what Microsoft gives you out of the box. If you want to do more, you can, but that's up to you. That's your responsibility as a developer, as a CTO, as an executive, etc. Now, the main question when we see this is, okay, but how do I make sure that Copilot is not reading everything in my organization? A lot of time people fear that, hey, this LLM is going to read all my emails, or is going to scan my tenant, then it's going to read the tenant next door, is going to confuse the information. And people are very afraid of data leakages or data security using artificial intelligence, which is completely justified in a general sense. But if we go to this graph, let me see if I can put this on a bigger screen. All right. We have to understand that Copilot is just another application inside Microsoft 365, meaning just the same way that you cannot read the Teams messages that are inside other person accounts, just like you cannot read the emails that are on your boss mailbox, just like you cannot access a OneDrive that is not yours unless that was previously shared. And the same for SharePoint. If you don't have access, you will not be able to view that information, all right? So how does this work? The first time I start interacting with Copilot, hey, Copilot, I don't know, search for this proposal and get me ABC. I send my prompt to Copilot, and the first thing that happens is ground, meaning Copilot says, okay, this is what the user wants, but now I'm going to perform the search only based on what I'm authorized to see, okay? Because it's not that Copilot has direct access to all the tenant. Copilot sends the query to Graph saying, hey, get me whatever the user is asking for, and Graph is going to return the results that you have the authorization to see, okay? So nothing, and I really mean it, nothing is going to be seen by other people or by Copilot unless you have shared the information with these people or that you are using a shared or a common place for storing that, all right? Let's say if I have a SharePoint site with all the organization, sure, whatever I save there is going to be viewed by everyone who can access that. But if that information is in a private SharePoint, in a private Teams, in my OneDrive, etc., only the people authorized for that are going to be able to see them. So after you send the information to either Bing, the plugins, or whatever is working, then Copilot will send the prompt to the LLM, to the large language model, with basically all the extras that are under the hood, all right? Because we have to understand that while this is generative AI, this has a lot of rules not to produce harmful content, to make sure that what you're getting is real information and other things. So sure, if I don't know, if I ask Copilot for a story about violence between two people, it will not give me an answer because it's not designed for uh, that kind of creative uses, right? Now, once the reply is, or once the whole prompt, I'm sorry, is sent to the LLM with all those rules about what you can, what you cannot see, the tone, the bias, etc., then Copilot will get a response, and that response that the LLM, sorry, sends to Copilot needs to be verified, okay? This means that the output is going to be reviewed, and Copilot is going to judge if this output is good quality or not. There are internal controls. So you might have instances where Copilot tells you that it doesn't trust enough on the output it's generating, or that it needs more information or more context in order to produce the result that you're looking for. And that's basically Copilot's way of saying, hey, I'm not sure I can create a quality output at this specific time and moment, so I'm going to skip it. How you can troubleshoot if this is an issue with Copilot as a service or only with your specific query? Basically changing the query, changing the words. If you're referencing a document, maybe try referencing another file, and those things are going to uh, give you more light about where the issue or where the blockage may be. If anyone has questions, please drop them on the chat again, guys, so I can reply to them, okay? All right. So let me come back here. Here, as I was saying, you will have all the long explanation with links for many services and many explanations. So it's a good starting point for understanding the technology. As for availability, these are the licenses that you can have. And let me rephrase it. These are the licenses that you need to have in order to be able to access Copilot. Meaning that you need a Microsoft 365 E5 or E3 license, an Office 365 E3 or E5 license, a Microsoft for faculty, so this is not for students, okay? This is only for teachers, as long as they have the A3 or the A5 license, meaning the paid license. And the same for Office 365 A3 or A5. As for business standard and premium, those are the only non-enterprise products that you can have for Copilot Access. I see in the comments someone asking, will the LLM be trained by user prompts over time for a specific tenant, or does it stay locked? And that's a great question. Microsoft will not train the model with your data, all right? No matter what you use or what you say. So it's not that, let's say, if you're always asking about, I don't know, cooking recipes, it's not that Copilot is going to learn about cooking to give you better results, all right? If your need is to train and customize your model, in that case, there are other options that Microsoft is launching. You have the OpenAI service run in Azure, where you have your own LLM, you train it, and you do whatever you want with it. And also you have Copilot Studio, which is a tool that will allow you to generate some some Copilot bots or some Copilot orchestrations. But if you're just using this version of Copilot, there is no training, okay? What the only thing that you can do is basically prepare the information inside your organization so Copilot can better understand it, which is what we are going to see once we start talking um, semantic links, all right? Okay, so I'm going to come to the next section. So for this, which talks specifically about the requirements, we already discussed the prerequisites, which are in this section, okay? And it's important to understand that we are using Entra ID, or what used to be Azure Active Directory, when we are interacting with Copilot for Microsoft 365, which is not the same as Copilot Pro, which is the version for consumers. Meaning that if I want to use AI and I don't want the company storing my prompts, training the model, or viewing what I do in any way or capacity, I need to use this version of Copilot, the paid version, all right? Here, you will have some requirements about the services, because, yeah, Copilot will use your ID, your OneDrive, your Outlook, your Teams phone, Loop, and Whiteboard, all right? But also, it's important to understand that this uses the standard practice for deployment and updates, okay? The goal is that you're on the basically on the latest version of Copilot in the click to run installer. So every time that you go to Office 365, you go to view account, and then you download your software, of course. So when you go here to, sorry, what's in my apps? Sorry, I think I lost the access. Well, when you install the Microsoft 365 apps, you will always be installing the click to run version, unless, of course, you're using Intune or any other, tool, service, etc. All right? Any questions so far? Because I know this is a bit confusing when you don't have experience with the product. Okay, I'm going to continue. So, what else do we need to know about Copilot before we start using it? As I was saying earlier, the data protection, as someone from the audience was just mentioning, hey, what's going to happen with the training and all of that, right? So let me zoom here. Here you have the full explanation, basically that, sure, you can interact with the service, the data is stored for the remaining of the session, but that is going to be discarded. There is no permanent storage of anything that you're doing. And the only reason that session remains is because if I go back to the conversation with Copilot, it, depending on the context, it should show the last interaction for that active session. So here you have the main pointers, all right, where it says that Microsoft doesn't retain the prompts or the responses. So it's both ways. It doesn't retain what you send, and it doesn't retain what you receive, all right? But this is for Entra ID users. So if I'm trying to use like my Hotmail account, that's another thing, right? And the prompts and responses are only maintained for a short caching period for runtime purposes, nothing else. But once you close the browser, the chat topic is reset or the session times out, whatever happens first, all of this data is going to be discarded, right? Also, another thing people are always asking, how is going to be my data secure? Is it stored or is it encrypted at transit, during rest, etc.? So in transit, they will always use TLS 1.2 or above. And when the data is at rest, AS128 is going to be used for encrypting the data. You can also apply additional layers of encryption, like when your own tenant handles the encryption keys or things like that. And it's also very important to understand that any advertisement that is shown is going to be uh, general information, okay? It's not based on the workplace identity. Meaning that if I work for, let's say, if I work for Microsoft, I'm not going to get ads that are targeted specifically at people working at Microsoft, right? So it's very important to understand that all the data is going to be secure, all the privacy regulation, GDPR, EU data boundary, and all of that is properly explained here. But in general terms, Copilot is as secure as any other Microsoft service, okay? There is no special treatments, there are no special permissions, there is nothing extra that you need to permit for Copilot that you wouldn't permit for other applications. And there are no other changes that you need to do inside your organization. That's the biggest value of Copilot. Because sure, if you build whatever you do with OpenAI, ChatGPT, if you use the offerings from Meta, from NVIDIA, from others, in that case, yeah, you have a bit of an issue because you have to expose your data to that AI, then you have to see how you control things, how you are going to govern that data, etc. But here, since everything is built with best practices in mind, this is just another application. So for you, is basically purchase the license, assign the license, and start using it. Any questions with this? All right, I'm going to continue. So, 1 second here, because now we have to talk about graph connectors in Microsoft 365. So, for those of you who don't know, Graph is basically the API that you have for interacting with Microsoft 365, right? And that API can be used for very simple things like getting reports. Instead of getting the reports from the admin center, I can query Graph, download that as a CSV, for example, and then I can process that in Power BI if I build my custom reporting, things like that. I can use Graph to create an application. For example, let's say I have a SharePoint intranet, so I want to say happy birthday to the people whose birthday is today, this week, this month, whatever. So if I want, I don't know, a pop-up where I press a button and that sends an email to, for example, Diego saying, hey, Diego, congratulations on your birthday or your promotion, that is basically Graph on the back end sending that message via the API instead of having to create an email account, expose that via keys to the application, and having a nightmare, which is maintaining that application in the long term. Sorry for that. So how does this extensibility via Graph works, right? First of all, Copilot is basically a large language model, Microsoft Graph, which is your data, the Microsoft 365 applications, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Teams, Outlook, Loop, Whiteboard, etc., and the internet. But what happens when you need to go beyond that, right? What happens if, let's say, I want to have a bot or an AI that's going to review my internal business process? There is no answer for that in the internet because that's information about my company only, right? So that's where you can build a plugin and have that plugin perform whatever actions you need. So, for example, here is what Microsoft is suggesting as an example. Hey, what tickets do I have assigned right now? And Copilot telling you, yes, you have ticket ABC assigned to you. And you can see this with integration, for example, with Copilot and Jira, where you can just query Copilot, and Copilot goes to Jira, gets all the tickets and all the items that you need to work on, and is going to produce that information. Instead of you going to Jira, checking all your items, etc. And here we have another example where you have the Microsoft Copilot client, either via web or via Teams, where you interact with Copilot, and Copilot can either interact with a plugin to get data in real time. So I could connect, Copilot to a data source or whatever for real-time operations, or I could just query semantic index, which is part of the intelligent search, and via the graph connector, I could access internal or external data. Some companies are, for example, they have a lot of data, so storing everything in SharePoint is cost prohibitive, but maybe they have a data lake. Maybe they have an Azure storage account, which is way cheaper than SharePoint storage. So they run archiving there, and Copilot could go to that archive and query whatever information is needed. What is the thing that you have to consider for this? Not only how you want Copilot to interact with the data via AI, but also the permissions and the structure that you are going to set up, okay? Because when I create an application, I have to give permissions to that application, meaning that going back to that example about me having that component to send a greeting email, right? For that, basically, I have to tell, or I have to have the application have the permission to send email on behalf of the user. Or if I wanted to search, the permission would be for searching, or the permission would be for posting in Teams, or the permission would be for uploading content to SharePoint, etc. And those permissions can be given either to an individual or to my entire organization. So it's always good to give the least amount of permissions needed, because you don't want an application that can run, view, and do everything inside the organization, because that's always a security risk, no matter how secure you build. And finally, in this section, we can see a very simple example of how the plugin would look. So basically, you would be in this 365, in this Microsoft 365 chat environment. And once you activate the plugins inside your organization, you will have the option here via this icon to access some plugins. In my case, this is the only plugin I have enabled, nothing else, which is the native plugin that allows Copilot to search in the web and add those results to the query. For example, I could say, sorry. So for this query, Copilot will go to the web to get those results, because I have no internal documents that's sharing this information. And well, then I had an error. Maybe I hit a restricted topic. And in this case, it's telling me that it can't chat about this. So yeah, let me refresh and get another reply. So as you can see, this is not a perfect product, of course. No product is perfect, especially at launch. But I can tell you that I have become way more productive with Copilot. I feel I can do 2 or 3 times the amount of work that I used to do, mostly because I'm able to interact daily with my data, with my applications, and do it in a more natural way. So yeah, here we can see that we have a response which is very vague, but it's a response nonetheless. Now, let me go to the next item. which is the semantic index, all right? Because so far we have talked that, okay, Copilot is a service, it's a licensed service. So all you need to do is add the right license to the user, and they're going to be able to use Copilot. You can extend Copilot via graph to build whatever action you need that is not built by default within the service. But you also have semantic index or intelligent search. And this is also another topic of confusion for people. Why? Because when we think of Microsoft 365 and more than Microsoft 365 SharePoint, SharePoint is basically search. And if I go, for example, to here, and I search, I don't know, Copilot here at the top. Here I have the generic SharePoint results. And this is something I can profile, something I can manage. I can set up suggested results. Maybe I can modify the query. So if I search for Copilot, instead of showing results, it will automatically take me to a SharePoint site and things like that. But the problem is that this requires a lot of knowledge from the person who is basically modifying the search box to produce those results. But when you're interacting directly with Copilot, what semantic index does is that this is going to analyze the content inside the tenant to generate relationships between them, okay? In the example that Microsoft has here, for example, here you have basically breakfast items, and here you have lunch or dinner items. And at the end, all of this content, like coffee, tea, donuts, breakfast, muffin, etc., all of this is, let's say, grouped into one category or one section, while all of these other contents are grouped inside this section. This is done because when Copilot needs to search information, it's impossible for it to go item by item. It would never finish. But if you have a hierarchy, knowing what is related to what, maybe my question was for this keyword, but I don't have anything related to muffins, but I have things related to donuts. And that's why donuts might become a relevant search result for that specific query. Here you have a longer explanation that says that, as I was saying, the top search is the Microsoft search, which is using conceptual understanding. Basically, it understands who am I, what can I see, or what's restricted to me, and if there's any modification on the search that needs to be applied for my user. But for Microsoft 365 Chat, as the name says, I can get relevant and actionable responses to prompts. Like that prompt I was showing you earlier when I say, hey, what are the most important emails that I have received in the last 24 hours, or things like that. And when you are using semantic index, is basically Copilot way of understanding what is the most important for your specific user. I don't know, let's say I work with someone who's named Ahmed, right? And maybe I have 50 colleagues named Ahmed inside my organization, but I only work with 2 of them. Sure, I can say, hey, what's the last information shared by first name, last name? That's going to be a very good idea. But with semantic index, when I say, hey, when was the last time Ahmed sent me an email? Semantic index understands that when I, as Sebastián Rodriguez, when I'm saying Ahmed, I'm referring to the person who works day by day with me, not to that other random Ahmed that's, I don't know, 3 departments over with whom I have never spoken before. And this is something, as I was saying, that people are always asking about. They're very confused because this is something that is constantly being queried, right? semantic index is a constant process because every new message, every new email, every new document, every new, list item, etc., needs to be indexed. So the only way I could achieve a 100% indexation for my tenant is if I put everything in read-only mode, which of course is not the idea. So people might be anxious. They might say, hey, I don't see the index at 100%. Is this good? Is it bad? Is Copilot not going to work for me, etc.? And in the end, all that person needs to care about is Copilot producing results, meaning before panicking about the index not being at 100%, let's understand what are the issues we are having. Are you able to use Copilot? Yes or no? Are you getting good responses? Because sure, if my semantic index is at 50%, but I'm asking about the emails received yesterday and everything is correct, that's great. That's working as intended. But if my semantic index was at, let's say, 99.9%, and I run the same query and it's giving me information from 1 month ago, that clearly means that I might be having an issue with Copilot itself, okay? So if you're using Copilot and you're a bit anxious about that specific feature, please don't be, just test the product, okay? Any questions so far? All right, I don't think so. So I'm going to move to the admin panel to review some admin settings. Then I'm going to quickly show a couple Copilot commands, and that's going to be everything for today's session. So tomorrow we are going to continue working specifically on Microsoft 365 chat. Okay, so tomorrow we are going to be having an in-depth session about that. Okay, so admin center. You have your tenant, you purchase Copilot, and okay, I see that someone raised his hand. So Babu, we don't have the mic enabled, but please go ahead in the chat and write your question. Let's wait for that question, and we are going to read it, okay? Okay, Babu, if you want, go ahead and write. I'm going to continue reviewing this in the meantime, okay? So, as I was saying, the first thing you do after you acquire the license is, of course, go to the admin center, go to your active users, and in the licenses and apps, you are going to be assigning the Microsoft Copilot for Microsoft 365 license. But you will see that there is a Copilot button here, okay? For this, you need to be a global admin because we still don't have a Copilot specific admin role. And when you click here, you will have very high-level information about Copilot in Bing, Edge, and Windows, which is basically your ability to turn it on and off. In my case, I don't have any setup available because my user is restricted on this demo tenant. We have Security Copilot, which is not part of the scope of this training, okay? Security Copilot is a product related to Entra ID services that uses AI to tell you things like, hey, this guy hasn't logged in 2 weeks, and now he's signing in from another content, things like that. It's a bit more preemptive and a bit more proactive than things like conditional access, for example. And we also have the plugin section. And in the case of plugins, again, I'm not going to be able to modify this, but it's very important that we understand that once we click the plugins, here we will have the option to enable plugin access to all the users, specific users, or no users, right? So you can also, especially if you're building your own plugin and things like that, you can enable this option only for the users who are part of that test group and leave the rest for when you want to extend to the entire organization. Any questions so far before I do a very quick demo of some of the capabilities that we have in Copilot? Okay, seems we do not. All right. So I'm going to show you some very quick things you can do with Copilot. Of course, as I was saying, you can do things like catching up on messages. But in my case, there will be no messages, so nothing to catch up, okay? But if you see this text box at the bottom, not only you can run or you can ask a question, but you can use / to reference information, okay? So I could do something like, how do I introduce myself to Hilder, one of my colleagues? And in this case, we will not have a high quality response because again, this is a test tenant where we are not actually using Copilot. But if this was my Microsoft account, for example, in that case, I would have a much more richer response. So here you can see that I have a small message, but also I could also do things like, can you summarize / and then I could choose a document or an email. In this case, I'm going to select this document. And this is going to read a document that's stored in my SharePoint. Sorry, in my OneDrive. So here I have my document. And here I have the key points. But the beauty that we have here is that since you have 30 terms per interaction, you can, for example, I'm asking here for a more executive output for someone who's not as well versed in technology or Gen AI as us. And that's how you start basically streamlining your answer and iterate. The way I use Copilot is that I basically write what I'm thinking, and then, hey, Copilot, please help me rewriting this into something that's, I don't know, shorter, more executive, more educated, or whatever. And here you can see that we went from a very technical summary of the document to something more executive. And here we only have 4 talking points, very brief, very well explained. But if I have to go to my boss and say, hey, boss, I need budget to run a training, I think it's easier for me to explain this with these 4 points to someone who doesn't understand technology than trying to explain to my boss maybe what is graph or what is intelligent search or why do I need to talk about licensing, etc. Other things you can do, and for this, I will go to PowerPoint. For example, you can launch here the Copilot option. And I can create a presentation from a file. Sorry, here, create a presentation from. And I will select that same Word document we had. I hit send. And this basically is going to read the document. And based on that, is going to create a presentation. Of course, this is not going to be perfect because it's generative AI. The product is new. And Microsoft is the first company integrating AI into productivity apps. Okay. But once you start learning how to structure your content, how to use styles, how to use templates as well, which is something we are going to be exploring, you can have very, very, very high quality outputs. Or if you have bad information, you will have a mess that's unusable. So here, Copilot analyzed my document. It created an outline with basically the points that need to be covered. And after that, again, this was done using, let me show you guys the document. This was done using a very, very, very simple document. And here I have a presentation. I have my agenda, my introduction. I have licensing, for example. Again, this is not perfect, but with this structure, for me, it's much easier to understand, oh, you know what? Maybe this is something I need to change or update. Maybe not. In this case, it's quite correct. So there's not much for me to modify. Yes, exactly. So here, let me add a comment. Well, in this case, let me expand this. Here you can see that the presentation notes were also added. So this is not for you to think, oh, Copilot is going to do the work for me. No, this is so Copilot can do the heavy lifting, the not so funny or not so fun part about work. So you only have to focus on the small details, on correcting very small things, maybe adding an image, changing the background, things like that, but not having to start from scratch. Because in my case, I hate doing presentations because for me, they take a lot of time. So if I were to produce something like this, for me, it would have been between 1 and 2 hours of work. And I don't have 2 hours of work to produce this. And that's 2 hours. After that, you need to go check it with the team, make sure everything is correct. Then you have to iterate again, etc. So with this, I take my Word document, I create something very quick, and I can tell to my boss, hey, Dago, look, I have this. What do you think? What do you want to keep? What do you want to remove, etc. But in the time that normally I would have produced only a draft at best, I can arrive with a partial solution. And this is only one example. Imagine if you start doing this for all your processes, if you start streamlining things. One of the things we have been using Copilot for, or we have been trying to use Copilot for, is, for example, after a meeting, ask Copilot, hey, was the tone of the meeting all right? Were everybody respectful? Was there someone who was left out? Are there questions that were not answered? Things like that. And we get very, very good feedback from Copilot Notes, all right? So I'm very, very excited to show all of those features to you guys tomorrow. As I said, this session was mostly informative, just so we all understand that we're talking about these specific products, the pros, the cons. And as I said, tomorrow we are going to have a session dedicated exclusively to M365 chat, which is the feature that we have here. Then on Wednesday, we are going to talk about the applications, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, OneNote. And on Thursday, we are going to talk about Power Platform. So team, with that, we are right on time for our session to finish. But I would like to hear your questions, your comments. If there's anything that I didn't explain properly, please let me know so we can go back to that. because my goal here is that everyone is aware of Copilot benefits, and if possible, start using it, because trust me, Copilot is going to change the way you work. No comments, team? Dago, any comment you want to make since you're in the audience as well? All right, perfect. So guys, this presentation is going to be saved, all right? This will be shared in our communications channels. Don't worry about that. And please come for tomorrow's session. Bring your questions as well, okay? I don't mind if you come with 20 questions, we can review them. I'll be glad to do so. And if you have any other questions, I'm going to write my email here, so you guys can reach out to me, okay? Great. All right, team. Thank you for everything, for being here, for making the time. I know it's a bit of an effort for everyone involved, and I'll see you guys tomorrow for the next session. Thank you and have a great day. Bye-bye.